Thank you very much. Thank you in particular to the organizers. I was in big difficulties to come here to honor this big invitation, and I really cared about it because I really cared about Salam and the ICTP. Well, but fortunately, I must say, Lars moved around. I had to come from Argentina, not from Europe, and it is something like a 36-hour flight. So it was a bit of a, but well, thank you. I'm here, and we are going to try to honor this big man, and also to talk a bit about the ICTP and the problems and the good things about it. Okay. So let me see. Okay, let me first begin with a caution. I mean, we are all of us giving testimonies about ICTP, about Salam, and we should be careful about what we mean by that. You know, every one of our testimonies is a subjective testimony. It adds something to the image that we are building of him, to the icon, to the role model, as Tasli was saying the other day, the person that we want to cherish and follow. And we should not take those testimonies as contradictory to each other, or to try to understand which are the contradictions, or to try. This is a typical attitude of a physicist, of a scientist, you know, to try to simplify, to try to explain. Well, you don't try to explain a complex personality like Salam. I mean, if you try to explain, then you will finally finish with something like a simplified version. And I'm sorry, perhaps it will finish like a superhero Hollywood character in some movie like The Brilliant Mind in I don't know what, etc., etc. Okay? No, what we are trying to do is to add and to find new facets of this extraordinary character. So let me give you just one example. When I read the interesting biography by Gordon Fraser about him, a fantastic biography, very full of details, etc. I was a bit taken aback by the subtitle, Cosmic Anger. I have never seen angry Professor Salam. So my first feeling was to say, well, I would not consider him angry. But then, in fact, the important thing is to try to add that aspect. And in fact, looking at it and following his biography and following his history, I realized that there has to be some anger in his way of looking at things. I mean, anger at the injustices, anger at the inequalities, anger at the situation in Pakistan, etc., etc. So I realized that this has to be added, even if it was not my particular perception. So I would like to say, we have to add all of these things. Well, yesterday or the day before yesterday, we heard his son talk about humility. Now, again, I haven't seen Salam in a sense of humility. I wouldn't identify Salam as a person characterized by humility. But on the other hand, I realized that he was a very religious man. And the family knew him in that particular context. And I'm sure that in that context, when he was thinking in religious and in terms of what he believed in Allah and in the cosmic and etc., I'm sure there was a bit part of humility. So thanks for adding that aspect to my picture of Salam, okay? This other aspect that I have somehow not seen. Okay, then we are trying to do that. We are trying to add all of these things. I think we have to respect the complexity of the person, okay? So let me now just, instead of a statement of absence of conflict of interest, I would like to say collusions of interest, okay? Whenever I have interacted with Professor Salam, I have taken some benefit from it. So I have to say very, very briefly. But let me just stress from the beginning that my interactions were not strong interactions. I had 6 moments of encounter before I became the director, and I will just very briefly describe them. You will see that in these moments of interaction, the interaction was not very strong. However, you will realize the importance that it has for me because it was an anchor in a life in which I had to go through several moments of turmoil, of problems because of my country, etc., etc. The ICTP was there and was helping us, and we knew it was there, okay? And in fact, you will see that at a certain moment it was crucial. So let me begin from the beginning. 1961, I was just very briefly, I was just finishing my undergraduate studies. I had to enter into some research group. There was Giambiagi and Bolini. I asked them to enter. They say, well, we will see, etc., we are not sure. But then Giambiagi had just come back from Castelletto, from the famous Castelletto Miramare meeting, and he was enthusiastic, and he talked to me very highly about the project of Salam. That was my first interaction. Giambiagi was very much into the dream of Salam. He was also a creator. He created the Department of Physics in Buenos Aires, that bears now his name. And I mean, he was very enthusiastic. He was very worried about science in the developing country, but at the same time, he was very skeptical. And that is something that we are going to go back to it. The first really, missed interaction was in 1966. You know, in 1966, there was this periodic military coup in Argentina. This one was innovating. Instead of closing the university, that they usually do, they close the university for 3-4 months, and then they reopen it. No, this time they decided to beat the professors. So they closed the university when all the professors were inside, and then they forced them to leave. And as they were leaving, there were 2 rows of policemen, and they were beating them, okay? That was it is called the night of the long sticks. In fact, it has been left. What was the idea? The idea was to humiliate. And you know, professors, academic professors, do not bear too much humiliation. They have this kind of sense of dignity. So what happened is that they resigned in mass the next day. I was not hit, particularly, because I was not in the university at that moment. But suddenly I was left with the university without any professor. So I had to leave. And I had to leave. I had just finished my thesis. And Professor Giambiagi said, well, we are going to get some position at ICTP. Well, Hector Rubinstein, an Argentinian who had been in Argentina, just he sent me a letter, in fact, in December, to go to Israel in January. So this has been in June. So I missed that opportunity. I didn't go to ICTP. The letter from ICTP has not yet arrived. So I went to Israel instead of ICTP. I remember at that time I was still doubting, but remember that time was the U-Twiddle 12 in ICTP, and it was massive cork models at Weizmann. I went to the Weizmann basically because of Hector Rubinstein, because of his personality. He was a very entertaining person in science. I mean. So I enjoyed working with him. So I went there. So that was a missed opportunity. The next opportunity was really a real one. In 1970s, we decided to go back to Argentina, 3 of us, 3 professors. Then what do? I passed through ICTP, and I talked with Professor Salam, and I said, look, we are going back to Argentina. We need 2 associateships. It was not normal. I mean, it was not part of the rules to give 2 associateships to 3 professors, okay? But he did it immediately, you know. That was the way he was. Immediately he decided, yes, 2 associateships for 3 professors. We didn't want 3 because we were going back. We had to teach. We had to do things in Argentina. We didn't want to move so often. With 2, it was okay. So we went back to Argentina, and things was very good. We knew we could count on that. Well, in Argentina, I changed subjects. I went to oceanography. We developed a big group under the direction of Isidoro Orlansky, a professor in Princeton. And everything was going right, except that in 1974, let me see, in 1974, you know, again, the government suddenly veered to the right abruptly. And this time they were not happy with simply beating professors. They put death squads in the streets. I had to move, I remember, I had to move each night from one house to another, you know, just to be safe. And many of the group was already rather large, there were 8 persons in the group, were in danger. One in particular was in very much danger because one of his acquaintances was involved in the leftist movement, and so she was very worried. So we had to leave, and again, there was a oceanography school at ICTP. We sent the request, and we get 3 invitations just right away because of the situation, etc., etc. So 3 of us went to ICTP. The rest went to the United States. I went to the United States. And in fact, let me tell you, just as an example of what the ICTP could do, one of these persons, the person who was really risking Silvia Garzoli, well, from this school, she was immediately noticed by one of the professors, offered her a position in Paris. From the position in Paris, she went to Geneva. From Geneva, she went to Columbia University as assistant professor. From the Columbia University, she got to professor, to full professor. She went to Washington to work for the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and she finished as a director in one of the laboratories in Miami who was studying the Southern Atlantic, okay? In fact, the project we had in Argentina, okay? And she was even able to go back to Argentina to ask for a military ship, you know, with Navy people there, and do measurements in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, now she's retired, but she has been the director of this group. So you see the difference that ICTP can do. A person who was really risking her life, she was able to do a very fruitful life, and even do at the end something for our country, for Argentina. Okay, as you see, well, in 1996, when I was professor in Rome, I was able to go very often to ICTP, and in that moment, I was meeting Salam, always in the corridors, always, you know, as I will mention afterward, he would take me by the arm and begin to convince me that I have to do things and that. In particular, when he heard about oceanography, he took me and he said, you have to go to speak with all of the people here, and you have to convince them that they have to do 2 subjects in the third world. An academic subject, like high energy physics or whatever, or theoretical condensed matter physics, and then an applied subject. You have to do that, etc., etc. I was a bit perplexed about that, but you cannot say no to Salam. You could not say no to Salam, like John Seaman famously said, right? I mean, you at least you would invoke religious arguments. I mean, I know that my religion doesn't allow me to do that. You have to do it. And I went to do it, and of course, the first person I talked, you know, you go to talk to someone who is doing, I don't know, Narayan, who was doing string theory, and you have to tell him, look, why don't you do a study draft in the place of India? And he will look at me and he say, who are you to tell me what to do? And in fact, it happened. I mean, that was the immediate reaction. But it didn't matter, because I went back to Salam and I said, look, it doesn't work. And he said, oh, don't worry. They will be useful in some other way. That was it. I mean, he was always optimistic. He was always like that. So these are six encounters. No, sorry. And the last encounter, of course, was in 1996, already a director. I went to see him in England. Bertocchi invited me to go there, insisted, prodded me to go there. And I went to see him. And really, it was very, very nice. I went there and I feel I had to take a commitment, a serious commitment, in front of him, in front of this fantastic person who was already could not talk. It was a very painful situation. And I told him, look, I am committed to follow your path at ICTP. ICTP will flourish. ICTP will continue to do what you wanted it to be. And really, I saw his eyes brighten. The twinkle that someone was saying, they were really brightening. So it was a very moving thing. And that was very important for me. That commitment was very difficult for me to forget. Okay, so this is it. So when was the dialogue with Salam began to be intense? Was after his death. Through the people and through his creation, seeing the ICTP, beginning to understand all the structure of the ICTP. I was surrounded by people who knew him quite well, Luciano Bertocchi, Angati, his longest secretary, and Amand. Amand, someone said, Fernando Quevedo said the same thing. Amand was merciless. I mean, you would go to him and say, look, I have a new idea about the ICTP, we can do this, we can do that. And he would say, yes, calmly, yes, Salam thought about it, 10 years ago, and he implemented it, and I can give you what was the result of that thing, It was very, very difficult to do anything innovative. I remember at one moment, there was this time that econophysics has come out, and I said, why don't we do a school in mathematical economics? And he said, yes, look, there is this unprecedented, this mathematical of economics course in that moment, etc., etc. Well, Ahmad was like that. I had to deal with him. Of course, Angati was sending me to Amman, incidentally. Angati was the memory of the center. It was a very useful thing. I also learned there the difference between some people, Jean-Biage, as I mentioned, and Salam. Both of them have been important in my life. But Jean-Biage was the typical, people from the Rio de la Plata, from our region. He was a kind of pessimistic. He was a realistic. He was a skeptic. He had ideas, but he was a skeptic. Well, Salam was the optimist, the buoyant person, the person that acted as if there were no obstacles, as if there could nothing happen, etc. And as I understood from many people, from other people, he acted as if he was imbued with a mission given to him by someone. I think this is a fact. I think his family has mentioned this several times, that his father thought that he had a mission and that this was very important. I think he really felt it. So in a certain way, he had God on his side. So, I mean, it was difficult for him to understand that there were going to be obstacles, right? So this is the first part. Now, as I said, this optimism could be a facade, that politicians normally speak very optimistically, but basically because they have to persuade other people. They are not optimistic themselves, but they have to, it is a trick. In fact, there is one of these famous cognitive psychologists, Steve Pinker, that says that one cheats oneself because it is the best way to cheat other people. I mean, so this is, politicians, sometimes perhaps they cheat themselves so as to be persuasive. But I don't think it was the case with Salam. I think in Salam, persuasion was because of his religiosity. As I said, persuasion was a conclusion of the fact that he really believed in miracles, he really believed that he had a mission, or perhaps three missions, as Gordon Fraser says. The three missions were, I mean, well, I have here the John Simmons quote, okay, but I have already mentioned something very similar, so I'm going to cross it, but John Simmons was very eloquent about how it was. So, well, let me go on with the organization of the. What do you say? Okay, this is the one. Okay, so yes, he had these three missions, okay, to empower his fellow scientists from developing countries. In fact, it's not only his fellow scientists. In fact, talking with him, it was clear that, what happened? Okay. It was clear that he was more worried about, the potential scientists in a rather isolated region, okay? Suppose Einstein was born, I don't know, in a very isolated region, and the only thing he had to do was to go to pick up some fruits somewhere. He would not have been able to become what he was. And that was the thing that worried him. I think he was worried because of he has risked that himself. I mean, he was, in a certain way, he had been helped through a series of miracles. So that was the point, not so much the one that is already a scientist, but the one that could become a scientist and perhaps would not become a scientist because he was born somewhere else. The possibility that you are not able to develop your potentialities. Of course, the second mission was to improve the status of modern science in the realm of Islam and provoke their renaissance. He was always talking about the fact that Islam was at the peak when the Christianity was still in the Middle Ages. And he was telling me, I remember, about the first academies in Iran, in Persia, etc. And of course, to understand better Allah's message by studying nature and making fundamental discoveries. He was part of this Ahmadiyya group, which is a relatively small, 20 million, and modern variant of Islam. Incidentally, I would like to stress a tolerant part, a peaceful part of Islam. It would be fantastic if we could talk with this particular group of people. This community is tightly knit, but allows for a very personalized relation with God. Salam's practice of his religion was immersed in this strong social network, but he didn't appreciate the self-appointed clergy. That is a very important thing. I think this quotation is very interesting. In most Islamic countries, a class of nearly illiterate men have in practice appropriated to themselves the status of a priestly class without possessing even a rudimentary knowledge of their great and tolerant religion. So you see, he had lots of conversation with people very knowledgeable on religion, on Islam. He often quoted the Quran, but as I said, he also claimed that Islam, more than Christianity, he was stressing this point, Islam, more than Christianity, asked the pious people to understand God studying nature. So the book in which Allah has written was the Quran and nature. This leads me to the second characteristic of Salam. Salam, as I said, was a person who was very much knowledgeable in theological issues. So I'm sure he was very much knowledgeable also in ethics. I mean, his ethics seemed to be very much developed. He discussed and conversed a lot about the theological issues with fellow scholars. Zafrullah Khan was one of them, but felt little obliged to obey rules that were coming from an external authority. Then I will not repeat the Michael Duff anecdote that was mentioned here, but I will repeat, you remember the final sentence of that thing, the advice he gives to the student. When all else fails, you can always tell the truth. I mean, if the student was telling, should I say the truth? I said, well, when all else fails, you can tell the truth, okay? For the time being, do something better, okay? Something else. This is quintessential Abdus. My point is that he had a deep sense of ethics. He dealt with big ideas and acknowledged tremendous injustices. And here perhaps comes the cosmic anger that I was saying I didn't understand at the beginning. He was extremely sensitive to these injustices, okay? And put upon himself ambitious goals. But in the pursuit of them, he would follow his own rules or bend those imposed. Now, be careful, because if you think that this means the end justifies the mean, no, it doesn't mean the end justifies the mean. If you know a bit of ethics, you have to take into account the categorical imperative, and this doesn't allow you any means. You have to be very careful. And I'm sure, because I talked with him and all his knowledge about theology and about ethics, that he was aware of that. Categorical imperative says you can do things that you would accept if everybody else were doing them. So it doesn't mean that you can do something that is only on your benefit, okay? So, but this fact, the fact that he has this idea, you know, that he could have his own rules, has been a source of serious misunderstanding. I would like to say that, because I mean, it's one of the complexities of Salam, and I think it is important to to mention, and I think it is something that has to do with some kind of a reivindication of all of the developing world people, you know. It has, this misunderstanding has even played into prejudices well entrenched in our world. Because you see, in a well-oiled, developed society, there are clear norms, rules, and one just obeys them. Because in that way, everything runs, okay? Not because they are just. You don't care about whether they are just rules or not. You obey them, you are a law-abiding person, you obey the law, and you are happy. Now, if the law is awful, you say, well, I mean, yes, sometimes we have to change it, I mean, the next election, I don't know. But you obey them, okay? And one is not supposed about the unintended consequences. You obey the law, and that's it. You live what Sartre used to say is a non-engagé, okay, or a non-political. It's a non-engagé, which is okay. I mean, in the developed world, why not? In the developed world, in normal times. As Sartre was pointing out, it is not very good in France during the occupation, okay? I mean, you could not obey the law in France during the occupation. You had to do something else. You had to be a bit more creative. I mean, you had to think about something else. Now, in the third world, it's it's almost like France during the occupation. To begin with, things never run smoothly, so you don't care too much about these questions of obeying rules, because in that way things run smoothly. And inequalities can be so much more dramatic, inequities, so that the moral individual is obliged to act continuously thinking about the acts and the non-acts. So in a third world country, to be non-engagé is immoral. That is part of the complexity of Salam, okay? And dealt with what that I do not, that is exactly the part that I would not like to be simplified. I mean, Salam knew about this, knew that he has to do something sometimes that were not exactly according to the rules imposed by society at that moment. An example of this confrontation, I think it is important to discuss it here. It is, you know, these two articles by Dombey, I don't know whether you pronounce Dombey or Dombey, you know, where the author accuses Salam of the use of ICTP's resources to further his prospect of the Nobel Prize. Well, these are the weird examples of his immoral behavior according to Norman Dombey, which I'm not criticizing, okay? I'm just saying that he's simply the consequence of a particular myopic view that you developed in a developed country. The permanent, he says as the point, the permanent invitation to Paul Dirac to visit the ICTP, because he was saying that he was inviting the Dirac because Dirac could recommend him for the Nobel Prize, okay? That was his idea. And in fact, I add a bit sarcastically, he could have added the creation of the Dirac Medal, though that would imply some violation of causality, because he was dead already, Dirac, and so he could not write any letter of recommendation. But anyway, then the other example, which is even more spectacular, the 1972 Conference on the History and Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, where, and I quote, he organized a conference banquet in honor of Dirac's 70th birthday, unrelated to the needs of the developed countries, of developing countries. So, you know, why do you organize a banquet when the developing countries, there is things, I mean, more important? To fraternize with important physics dignitaries, Dirac, Heisenberg, Wigner, Bethe, Casimir, and Peierls, okay? Then, in 1970, the appointment of Stig Lundquist to organize the condensed matter physics, in anticipation that 3 years later, he would become a member of the Nobel Committee. The use of the ICTP official mail service to send personal letters requesting support for his candidacy. And he doesn't say, but I would add, the use of the telephone system, because I'm sure sometimes he called by telephone somewhere. And Dombey adds, and this is unbelievable, the record of how Salam won his Nobel Prize does not suggest that he was particularly scrupulous in determining whether a particular activity was undertaken for the benefit of science in developing countries or to advance his own research in elementary particle theory. So you realize how, if you begin to take into account the rules, you finish in a ridiculous statement. I mean, he should have been careful not to try to advance his own research, because his own research was not connected with the developing country. Now, helping things to happen. Look, I am sure, of course, Salam took advantage of the ICTP to further his chances. And in fact, there is a testimony by Stig Lundquist himself. I mean, later, I don't know whether he was able to anticipate, but Stig Lundquist says in a very understated way, you know, typical of a Swedish, we discussed the scientific program and above all the physics Salam was doing whenever he was encountering Salam, okay? The possibility of the Nobel Prize for him was coming close, and as I was a member of the Nobel Committee, these discussions became very complex. You can imagine, okay? Abdus Salam telling Stig Lundquist all about the Standard Model, who was not exactly of the interest of Stig Lundquist, right? But okay, that is, but is it wrong, this? I think Salam should be praised for this effort. Because, as you know, the university makes an effort to get a Nobel Prize for some of his faculties. The developing world is happy that someone from the developing world is getting a Nobel Prize. Italy was extremely happy that Salam got the Nobel Prize. And the International Atomic Energy Agency also, because it was justifying. I am totally convinced that all the scientists of the developed world were happy when they learned about this prize, okay? And immediately the intended consequences, because these are not the unintended consequences. That was the intended consequence, what Salam wanted. As a consequence of the Nobel, the ICTP made a big step forward. Italy was able to increase its contribution. The International Atomic Energy Agency also increased the contribution. Aman says that from a growth of 3% in the number of visitors a month after the Nobel, that began to increase by 10%. Okay? But then Salam, he was saying that immediately. He said, well, now that they have the prize, they have to begin to move around and to go to give this message to all of the places. In fact, in the next 3 years, he visited 54 countries, okay? 54 countries, and 6 in Latin America, 21 in Asia, and 17 in Africa. Alote was mentioning yesterday that, in fact, after that prize, he developed lots of things in Africa itself. Okay, so you can imagine. I mean, it's not the, at least it's not my ideal of life in 3 years to visit 54 countries, you know, meeting dignitaries and meeting things. And the message was always the same: the importance of science in the developing countries, etc. He later, in fact, also as a consequence of the Nobel, because he got money from Italy, he convened other Nobel Prize winners a bit later and created it was. So this was the aim. His son mentioned yesterday that, in fact, the money that he got from the Nobel Prize, he donated it. So, I mean, it's obvious that his goal was an extremely ethical goal, a very high-level objective. So, well, I think the same thing happened with the ICTP creation. I mean, here we don't have the data, but you remember that from 1960 to 1964, he makes this tremendous effort to create the ICTP. And in particular, let me remember that, well, he passed, well, he started with the Castelletto meeting, in fact, where he met Paolo Budinich. Paolo Budinich was another very important person in the creation of the ICTP. We should say that. I am Italian, and I would like to mention this fact. Without him, it would have been completely different. I mean, he really was a key person. He mobilized the Italian community. He was able to get all the money that was needed. I mean, in fact, I think it was very important. But okay, we are talking about Salam here. Well, he passed, during that period, he passed from Board of Governors meeting to general conferences at the EIA, using the corridors to seduce delegates from other countries. At a certain moment, this is well known, but I would like to repeat it because it has not been said here. At a certain moment, he had the Scientific Advisory Committee of the International Atomic Energy Agency against his project of creating an international center. The representatives of the US, the representatives of the Western Europe, and in a strange coincidence, also the Soviet Union against, and the representative of the Eastern countries against. So this is where my Professor Professor Giambiagi would have given up. He would have said, well, come on, this is impossible, but not Salam, okay? Here is where the religiosity, I think, comes out also. He was imbued, he had some God behind him, he was not going to give up. And in fact, he seduced many of the members of the developing country. Of course, the developing country knew which was their interest, and when, after the declarations of these people against finished, he gave his talk, and then the delegates from the developing country began to talk, and there was such unanimity that, believe it or not, both the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc gave up, and they didn't oppose the idea. Some of them abstained, and many of them approved, voted positively. So this is one of the miracles that he has done, and of course this is because he has talked a lot with this delegate, okay? Rabbi said that it was a very eloquent talk. I think that it also, I am a bit more skeptic. I think there was a lot of corridor agreements and discussions, etc. I'm not naive. I mean, I'm sure that he maybe promised lots of things in that thing. But I mean, it was a nice thing to do. Okay, still the Scientific Advisory Committee continued to be against. I must say that Nielsen, the director of the agency, was in favor. Okay, that is an important fact. But then again, that shows also Salam was not a lonely genius. He had the talent of a consummate politician to keep up at any time hundreds of friendly contacts and colleagues in faraway places whose help or assistance he could invoke at once if necessary. The period 1960-1964 was particularly rich in new fellow partners, and I would like to mention Baghdadi because I met him, and I think his point during the assembly is important because it changed a bit the way things were being said. So Baghdadi said there, who allows you, addressing the developed countries, to deny 3/4 of mankind, the underdeveloped countries, the right to learn about the stars? Because, you know, the question was about theoretical physics, whether theoretical physics was the right thing to give to the developing countries, etc. And he gave that. And this is a bit demagogical, a bit populist statement, but it changed the context of the discussion. From then on, the question was, like Tasnim was saying the other day, self-respect, dignity of the world, of the populations of all the world. Why wouldn't all of the people of the world, independently of the region, be able to add knowledge to, I don't know, to the high energy physics, to the Higgs discovery, to whatever? Why there should be that? And this is something also Salam changed. And it became, instead of the argument, which was basically an argument in terms of economics, I mean, you cannot develop technology without having science, etc. It became another argument, an argument that if you are a human being, you have the right to contribute to the development of science. And in fact, it came as a new human right. I think we should perhaps fight for this to become a human right. The human right, people in all parts of the world should be able to participate in the discoveries. This will be very good for Atlas and these groups. We need so much people that, I mean, you have to open them to people from all parts of the world. Well, now I go into the collaborators. How much do I have? 3 minutes. So, well, Well, I wanted to say that Salam was always bursting with ideas and projects and didn't bother with the details and bureaucracy. He needed collaborators, and again, he was very good at recruiting the best. He was a difficult mentor and leader because he pretended a lot and fast. Many of them testified that he could be rude at times, but friendly, loyal, and tolerant in the long run. The perfect mix to build long-lasting loyalty. And the Italians, I would like to make the Italian, Budinic, Fonda, Virardi, Amati, Denardo, Luciano Bertocchi, they were extremely loyal and extremely working. Bertocchi says, Salam delegated many responsibilities to me. His mode was, this is what I want, find a way, okay? For 20 years we were collaborating closely and also fighting each other. But the fights always ended in mutual understanding. That, you see, now we have to fill the details. Salam at this moment, I understood that when he was young, he was able to do this tremendous calculation like the Matthews calculation. But later, he was not very much happy doing the details of the calculation. He left that to his collaborator. The same thing with the administration, okay? He would leave all that to the other one. He continued creating. The ICGEB, the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, was created by him, and it is flourishing. The ICS, the International Center for Science and High Technology, it has derailed. It is dead. And I think we should pay attention for that. I want to reach there, okay? Because that's the point. I want to mention that one can derail still these things. To us, it's flourishing, okay? During that time, while he was doing, well, we have heard that the 20 centers, and Fernando Quevedo now is in fact doing that, creating 20 centers that he aspired to create. So you see, the collaborators are doing lots of these things. Periodically, Bertocchi was dealing with some bad fluctuations in the Italian contribution. The money was coming from a particular chapter in the Italian budget, and it could be moved rather easily. And Italian, as you know, passes through fiscal crisis every time and then. So they sometimes, they were not, finally they were always arriving, but they were delayed a lot. And that was a real big problem, okay? So Bertocchi had to deal with that. Well, then the question comes, the institutionalization of the ICTP. I'm going to go very fast. Was it necessary to institutionalize the ICTP? The ICTP was run basically thanks to the charisma of Salam. Salam would basically direct it directly, and he was so much respected and so much loved that he was able to create consensus just by saying something. But the ICTP is populated by normal people, okay? And normal people need rules, and rules that are built by other normal people through consensus. At ICTP, that was the task of his collaborators, Saif, Yulu, Narasimha, I forgot George Thompson. I mean, what a thing. The Italians, okay? And after his death, I became another collaborator, okay? Collaborator of the same project. Normal people committed to the same goal, not exceptional people like Salam, but normal people committed to that same goal. Well, let me give you a few examples of the normal tasks I had to take care of from 1995 to 2002. The stabilization of the Italian budget. That was a fantastic idea of our administrative secretary. Suddenly he realized that we could make the contribution, the Italian contribution, obligatory, as it is obligatory the contribution to the UN or to the UNESCO. And so it became obligatory and it could not be moved anymore. So from that moment on, the situation improved. The upgrade of Italian contribution, that was thanks to Nicola Cavivo. I mean, I was the director, but in fact, Nicola Cavivo knew people in the ministry. Suddenly, the budget went from $6.5 million to $11.5 million. The transfer from EIA to UNESCO, the writing of the staff rules and regulations, all of these things, okay? New directions in weather and climate, statistical physics, discrete mathematics, the ICTP be renaming into the Abdus Salam ICTP, but all these tasks require normal people, okay? Unfortunately, normal people abound. But they should be committed. That is the key issue, okay? They should be committed to the goals of the ICTP. With hindsight, we should be cautious. I cannot go into the details here publicly, but let me say that at least in 2 occasions, the ICTP really risked derailment. Really risk going into the wrong way, okay? Both during the process of nominations of a new director. The ICS did derail, so this is not an hypothetical thing. you can make the ICTP derived. So now, what are the last thing and my conclusions? For the future, I suggest that the community of physicists who are committed to the ICTP, who care about the ICTP, should somehow have some kind of implicit organization and remain attentive, particularly the moments of nominations of a new director. They should always minimally demand that the director be a theoretical physicist of a certain degree of knowledge or level or whatever, who shares the goals of Abdus Salam and the ICTP, and if she or he doesn't have experience in administration, he should simply declare the willingness to learn. We should not accept that the decision be done in terms of how large administrative knowledge he has. Fernando Quevedo didn't have any administrative, and he has become a fantastic director. So the point is, the ICTP does work. We have a good system. The system works. We do not need someone who will know administration. You need someone who knows physics, who has ideas, who wants to follow the paths of Salam, and that's the key issue. We do not want someone who has been in administrative position there and then says, oh, the ICTP is a higher administrative position, so I take it so that next time I get to this other administrative position, which is higher. No, we don't want that, okay? So, as I said, this is the final thing. As I said, normal people are many, so we have to choose between normal people. We don't need exceptional people. Exceptional people are rare. And let us thank someone. If you believe in one God, you should thank your God for Abdus Salam. I thank Abdus Salam himself because I don't believe in any God, but I thank Abdus Salam himself for having existed, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel.
Almost in time, huh?
Any questions? We have one here.
No, I'd like to make some comments about the Nobel Prize and a little bit of reflections to that. You have to go back to think about those two papers, you know, that eventually, the Weinberg paper and the Salam paper. The work was done in 1967, both of them. But this was, at the time, a rather crazy idea. It was one of these ideas that was around, but neither of them really believed in the idea at the time. And it's very obvious that Weinberg did not believe in his model, because there was a, before he published his paper, he talked at a Solvay conference, and so he described it. And then François Englert came up and said, we believe that this model is renormalizable. We have done some calculations to show that. And Weinberg said, you're wrong. No, they said. And then Weinberg said, one of us is wrong. But evidently he went back and he realized that he changed probably his paper. So in the end it says something about renormalizability. Yes. Abdus Salam, on the other hand, you know, he had all these things also, and he waited to present it at this Nobel Symposium, which came half a year later. And again, you know, as a brilliant idea that might not work. And of course, nothing happened until 't Hooft eventually proved the renormalizability. And both of them realized, you know, that they were sitting on a gold mine, and this is what we have been sort of digging from after that. So, but that must have created, and Ahmad might know more about it, of course Abdus Salam got worried about that. He should have written his paper at the same time, just to be sure. And so that's one thing. And then if you come to, if you have, you know, if you believe that you have something which is worth a Nobel Prize, everyone is somehow campaigning for. And in Sweden, Swedes are, in some sense, strange people. We hate, you know, when people talk about themselves. So there's a Scandinavian saying that you should not believe that you are something. That Christian can, it's coming from Denmark, but it's the same in Norway and Sweden. And of course, both Weinberg in his way and Abdus Salam in his way were campaigning. That was natural. And, but the thing which is very interesting, which I think also shows a part of of Salam's personality, is that was accepted in Sweden. People liked him even more after that, you know. So, and that's, you know, sort of an answer to Dombey's paper there.
I'd like to add some more comments to Lars' statements. When I saw Dombey's 2 articles, I was quite upset, actually, and I had some email correspondence with him, because he claimed that Salam was not worthy. He'd done it after Weinberg. And I can completely refute that, because I was at the lectures where he presented his ideas on the spontaneous breaking at Imperial College, and it was done simultaneously, in fact, slightly earlier than Weinberg's paper came out. I want to publicly say so. It was an independent piece of scientific work by Salam.
Thank you.
Very quick comment. Miguel, thank you very much for a very thought-inspiring and carefully constructed piece. I really enjoyed it. Would love to talk to you about some of the issues you raised. But just one very simple point from my perspective. To my mind, you had the most difficult job of all, stepping into my father's shoes. You did that amazingly well, you did it magnificently, and you threw yourself into it. Sure, you made mistakes, but you had a lot of successes. And we, and I think everybody in ICTP now, recognizes and appreciates the hard work you did. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Well, may I say something?
You're allowed.
Well, no, it just that, I mean, really, it was simply because my commitment to Salam. It was not that difficult. The point is that if you really, so that's the reason why I insist. What we should be able to measure for the directors, and that is the same with Fernando, okay, is that they really share the goals. Then if you share the goals, then you work a lot. I mean, you feel committed. I mean, you know, I dedicated hours and hours. I'm ashamed of the number of hours I dedicated to staff and staff regulations. I am ashamed because, I mean, you know, why lose time there? But because I knew that it was important for Salam's dream, which was our dream, okay? I'm saying Salam's dream, but it was our dream. We essentially, we took it as our, okay? This is the dream of every person coming from a developing country, okay?
Right? When I was serving as a member of Science Council when you were Director General, Nicola Cabibo was attending all the time, representing the Italian government.
Yes.
I always thought he's a very crucial person, liaison between Italian government and ICTP. And you never mentioned his name.
Yes, no, I did mention.
You did?
No, I did mention. When we got the increase of the budget, I said it explicitly that it was because of Nicola Cabibo.
Yeah, I just want you to how you assess his.
No, in fact, it was crucial. It was crucial. When, in fact, again, let me be fair, because after all, I mean, I am old, so why should I praise? I mean, I do not have any new career to follow, so I do not. In fact, it was Bertocchi who insisted to get Nicola Cabibo. Nicola Cabibo was my colleague in Rome, and I went and I asked him, and he accepted. And it was crucial, because Nicola was the guy, we went to talk with the Ministry of Education, with the Secretary of Education. And in fact, we were asking them something like, well, I don't remember now, something like $2 million, just to level the budget, because there has been some inflation, and you know salaries in the UN system continue to grow, and we were beginning to be short of it. And I was with Nicola. Nicola knew quite well the secretary, and he made a very good talk there. And you know, Instead of 2 million, we got 5 million. So that Nicola was very crucial. And of course, he was the head of the scientific council. He was always helping me. He was also the head of the steering committee. So he was a very key person in all those things. And he had a tremendous experience. So, I mean, I really appreciate him a lot. Okay? Nicola has been very, very important. I mean, all of the Italian, you know, the problem with Italian that there are so many there that have been crucial in the development of the center. In fact, I mean, I'm sorry that we do not dedicate a bit much to them.
I think we should stop there and thank Miguel again.
Okay.